children,
except one,
grow up.
They soon know that they will grow up, and the way Wendy knew was this.
One day, when she was 2 years old, she was playing in a garden, and she plucked another flower and ran with it to her mother.
I suppose she must have looked rather delightful, for Mrs. Darling put her hand to her heart and cried,
"Oh, why can't you remain like this forever?"
This was all that passed between them on the subject, but henceforth Wendy knew that she must grow up.
You always know after you are two. 2 is the beginning of the end.
Of course, they lived at 14, their house number on their street, and until Wendy came, her mother was the chief one. She was a lovely lady with a romantic mind.
The many gentlemen who had been boys when she was a girl discovered simultaneously that they loved her, and they all ran to her house to propose to her.
Except Mr. Darling, who took a cab and nipped in first, and so he got her.
Mr. Darling used to boast to Wendy that her mother not only loved him, but respected him. He was one of those deep ones who know about stocks and shares.
Of course, no one really knows, but he quite seemed to know. And he often said stocks were up and shares were down, in a way that would have made any woman respect him.
Wendy came first, then John, then Michael.
For a week or two after Wendy came, it was doubtful whether they would be able to keep her, as she was another mouth to feed.
Mr. Darling was frightfully proud of her, but he was very honourable, and he sat on the edge of Mrs. Darling's bed, holding her hand and calculating expenses, while she looked at him imploringly.
She wanted to risk it, come what might, but that was not his way. His way was with a pencil and a piece of paper, and if she confused him with suggestions, he had to begin at the beginning again.
Now, don't interrupt.
He would beg of her.
I have £1.17 here, and 2 and 6 at the office. I can cut off my coffee at the office, say 10 shillings. Making 2 and 9 and 6 with your 18 makes 3, 9, 7 with 5, 0, in my checkbook makes 8, 9, 7. Who is that moving? 8, 9, 7, ... carry 7. Don't speak my own. And the pound you lent to that man who came to the door. Quiet, child. Carry, child. There, you've done it. Did I say 997? Yes, I said 997. The question is, can we try for it a year on 997?
Of course we can, George.
But she was prejudiced in Wendy's favour, and he was really the grander character of the two.
Remember mumps?
He warned her almost threateningly, and off he went again.
Mumps, £1. That is what I have put down, but I dare say it will be more like 30 shillings. Don't speak. Measles, 1.5. German measles, half a guinea makes 2.15, 6. Don't waggle your finger. Whooping cough, say 15 shillings.
And so on it went, and it added up differently each time. But at last, Wendy just got through.
There was the same excitement over John.
And Michael had an even narrower streak.
But both were kept.
And soon you might have seen the 3 of them going in a row to Miss Fulsom's kindergarten school, accompanied by their nurse.
Mrs. Darling loved to have everything just so, and Mr. Darling had a passion for being exactly like his neighbours.
So, of course, they had a nurse.
As they were poor.
Owing to the amount of milk the children drank.
This nurse was a prim Newfoundland dog called Nana, who had belonged to no one in particular until the Darlings engaged her.
She proved to be quite a treasure of a nurse.
how thorough she was at bath time, and up at any moment of the night if one of her charges made the slightest cry.
It was a lesson in propriety to see her escorting the children to school,
walking sedately by their side when they were well behaved,
and butting them back into line if they strayed.
No nursery could possibly have been conducted more correctly.
There never was a simpler, happier family until the coming of Peter Pan.
Mrs. Darling first heard of Peter when she was tidying up her children's minds.
It is the nightly custom of every good mother, after her children are asleep, to rummage in their minds and put things straight for the next morning, repackaging into the proper places the many articles that have wandered during the day.
If you could keep awake.
But of course you can't.
You would see your own mother doing this, and you would find it very interesting to watch her.
It is quite like tidying up drawers.
When you wake in the morning, the naughtiness and evil passions with which you went to bed have been folded up small and placed at the bottom of your mind. And on the top, beautifully aired, are spread out your prettier thoughts, ready for you to put on.
These islands in your mind are Neverlands, and they vary a good deal from person to person.
John's, for instance, had a lagoon with flamingos flying over it, at which John was shooting, while Michael, who was very small, had a flamingo with lagoons flying over it.
John lived in a boat turned upside down on the sands, Michael in a wigwam, Wendy in a house of leaves deftly sewn together.
John had no friends. Michael had friends at night. Wendy had a pet wolf, forsaken by its parents. But on the whole, the Neverlands have a family resemblance. And if they stood still in a row, you could say of them that they have each other's nose, and so forth.
Occasionally, in her travels through her children's minds, Mrs. Darling found things she could not understand. And of these, quite the most perplexing was the word Peter.
She knew of no Peter, and yet he was here and there in John and Michael's minds.
While Wendy's began to be scrawled all over with him.
The name stood out in bolder letters than any of the other words, and as Mrs. Darling gazed, she felt it had an oddly cocky appearance.
Yes, he is rather cocky,
Wendy admitted with regret.
But who is he, my pet?
He's Peter Pan. Oh, you know, Mother.
At first, Mrs. Darling did not know, but after thinking back into her childhood, she just remembered a Peter Pan, who was said to live with the fairies.
And there were odd stories about him, as that when children died, he went part of the way with them, so they should not be frightened.
She had believed in him at the time, but now that she was married and full of sense,
She quite doubted whether there was any such person.
Besides, he would be quite grown up by now.
Oh no, he isn't grown up.
Wendy assured her confidently.
And he is just my size.
Mrs. Darling consulted Mr. Darling.
But he smiled, pooh-pooh.
Mark my words, it is a nonsense Nana has been putting into their heads. Just the sort of idea a dog would have. Leave it alone and it will all blow over.
But it would not blow over, and soon the troublesome boy gave Mrs. Darling quite a shock.
Some leaves of a tree had been found on the nursery floor, which certainly were not there when the children went to bed.
And Mrs. Darling was puzzling over them when Wendy said, with a tolerant smile,
Is that Peter again?
Whatever do you mean, Wendy?
It is so naughty of him not to wipe his feet.
Wendy was a tidy child.
She explained in quite a matter-of-fact way that she thought Peter sometimes came to the nursery in the night and sat on the foot of her bed and played on his pipes to her.
Unfortunately, she never woke, so she didn't know how she knew. She just knew.
What nonsense you talk, Precious. No one can get into the house without knocking.
I think he comes in by the window.
My love, it is 3 floors up.
Were not the leaves at the foot of the window, Mother?
It was quite true. The leaves had been found very near the window.
Mrs. Darling did not know what to think, for it all seemed so natural to Wendy that you could not dismiss it by saying she had been dreaming.
My child, why did you not tell me of this before?
I forgot.
Oh, surely she must have been dreaming.
Certainly Wendy had been dreaming.
But Wendy had not been dreaming.
As the very next night showed.
The night on which the extraordinary adventures of these children may be said to have begun.
On the night we speak of, all the children were once more in bed.
It happened to be Nana's evening off, and Mrs. Darling had bathed them and sung to them until one by one they had let go her hand and slid away into the land of sleep.
All were looking so safe and cosy that she smiled at her fears now and sat down tranquilly by the fire to sew.
It was something for Michael, who on his birthday was getting into shirts.
The fire was warm, however, and the nursery dimly lit by 3 night lights. The sewing lay in Mrs. Darling's lap.
Then her head nodded, oh, so gracefully.
She was asleep.
Look at the 4 of them.
Wendy and Michael over there.
John here.
And Mrs. Darling by the fire.
There should have been a 4th nightlight.
A shadow lurked at the window.